Hello and welcome back to another edition of Miss Gronefeld's Class Online. Thought I'd make it fun today. So you guys have spent a little bit of time practicing like up above. Let me put this down again. You guys spent some time on these two problems, practicing them, and we also did some notes with this, finding the y-intercept by looking at a graph, finding x-intercepts by looking at a graph, identifying the vertex, the domain, the axis of symmetry, and the range. So today we are going to move on, and you guys are actually going to be able to graph these today. Didn't want that to happen, sorry. So we're only going to graph in standard form like I've mentioned before, and standard form is what this is right here in that green highlighter. So today we're going to practice by graphing the function 4x squared minus 8x plus 1. So our first thing that we want to do is find the axis of symmetry. So we do that by taking our negative b over 2 times our a value. So the opposite of this value divided by 2 times this value. So the opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. And then we're going to do 2 times our a value. So 2 times 4. So when we do that, we have 8 over 8. And 8 divided by 8 is 1. So our axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. So before we move on anymore, I'm going to go ahead and graph that. So I'm going to graph that axis of symmetry at x equals 1, which is just that straight up and down line right here at 1. That's that pink line. Let me make it a little bit thicker for you guys. Not that thick. Oops. And my handy dandy tool will make it a straight line for me. All right. So then if I want to come back over here, wherever my thing is, oh no. We're going to find the vertex. So we're going to plug our 1 back into our equation. So to find the vertex, we plug in our axis of symmetry value back into our equation. So our axis of symmetry here was 1. So I'm going to say f of 1. So I'm going to plug 1 in everywhere where there was an x value. So if you looked back up at our equation, it was 4x squared minus 8x plus 1. So I'm just going to plug 1 in wherever there was an x. So when I do this, I have 1 squared is just 1. And 4 times 1 is 4. Minus 8 times 1, which is negative 8. Plus 1. So if I do a little bit further math, 4 minus 8 is negative 4, and then negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So this tells me my point. So my point then comes out to be my x value was 1, and I got a y value of negative 3. So I can go ahead and plot that on my graph. I can go over to 1, and then down to negative 3, and my vertex is going to be right there at that blue point. So some key features we need to think about are what are our A, B, and our C values. So these are going to come back into play, remember? So our A value here was 4, our B value was negative 8, and our C value was 1. So we can determine if the parabola is going to open up or down based on whether or not our A value is positive or negative. So since our A value is positive, that means our parabola is going to open up. So it's going to make more of like a U shape. So since I guess I'll leave this picture over here because it'll help me answer the next question. So since my parabola opens up, am I going to have a maximum value or a minimum value? Well, here I'm going to have a minimum value, and it's going to be whatever that vertex point is. And then I can go ahead and figure out the rest of this information. So my axis of symmetry we already found was at x equals 1. And then we found my vertex, which was 1, negative 3. We can find my y-intercept by looking at our c value, remember? So the y-intercept, my x is always 0, and my y value is always whatever that c was. And our c value for this problem is 1. So then this asks for another point. So before we do that, I want to go ahead and graph that y-intercept. So again, that happens at 0, 1. So 0, 1 is right here. And since I know where my axis of symmetry is, and I know that parabolas are symmetrical along that axis, whatever this point here is that I just graphed, that y-intercept, I'm going to have a point on the opposite side at the same point. So I'm going to have one right here at 2. So if you notice, this is 1 away from that axis of symmetry. My y-intercept was 1 away from that axis of symmetry. So that means that I need to go 1 in the opposite direction to find my second point. Which that second point I can call 2, 1. Now that we know that, we can graph our pretty parabola and we can be done with this problem. So let's graph this guy. It's going to come down and hit that vertex and then go right back up. So we have something that looks like that purple parabola there. So I was going to have you guys try, but I am going to do a second one with you just so that you guys can get kind of the gist of what's going on, and then I'll post some practice problems. So I would like for you to graph the function -1/2 x plus 2x minus 1. So we need to think about our key features here. So what is my a value? Well, that's -1/2. My v value is 2, and my c value is -1. So I can determine if I'm going to open up or down based on the sign of my a value. So my a value here is negative, which means it's going to point down. So it's going to look like a frowny face. So since my parabola is pointing down this time, I'm going to have a maximum value, which would be the vertex of that. To find that axis of symmetry, again, we do b over the negative b over 2a. So if I plugged in those values, I'd be doing 2 divided, -2, my bad, sorry. -2 divided by 2 times -1/2, which means I'm doing -2 divided by -1. So I just get 2 here. So my axis of symmetry happens at x equals 2. So I did that work over here in this blue. So I'll come over here and I'll graph that in blue as well. So this happens at x equals 2. That is my axis of symmetry. Why does that keep doing that? All right, so then we need to find our vertex. So the way that we find our vertex, if you remember, we talked about we plug our x value from the axis of symmetry into our function. So I'm going to do f of 2. So our function again was -1/2 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 1. My dad is currently yelling for the cat. I apologize if you can hear that in the background. 2 squared is 4, so now I have 1/2 times 4 plus 2 times 2, which is also 4, and then minus 1. So -1/2 times 4 is -2 plus 4 minus 1. -2 plus 4 is 2, and then 2 minus 1 more is 1. So that means that my y value there is 1, which means I have a vertex at 2, 1. 2 meaning it comes from my axis of symmetry, 1 coming from the fact that I just plugged that into my function. So I need to plot the point 2, 1 here. My y-intercept, so y-intercept comes from 0 as my x value because I'm not moving over on the x value since I'm staying on that y-axis, and whatever my c value was. So 0, -1. So if I come over here and go to 0, -1, I'll have a point right here. And again, since this is symmetrical, if I have a point here, that's 2 spaces away from that from that axis of symmetry. So I'm going to go 2 spaces in the opposite direction and put another point. So that second point is at 4, -1. So that's what I'm going to put here, 4, -1. And then I can go ahead and graph that parabola. All right, so the problems that I would like for you to do today is number 1. Let me make this a little bit of a thicker line. I'd like for you to do number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So it's okay if you can't print this off and write on the page itself. If at least you can give me this part, that would be great. But I do want you guys to get practice with physically graphing them as well. So it'd be super awesome if you could create your own graphs as well. So even if you just have to go on your own sheet of paper and kind of do one of these guys and then like label the important points, I'm fine with that, just as long as I can see that you are practicing graphing, as well as finding all of this other information, like what's your A, B, C value, tell me whether or not it opens up or down, is the vertex a max or a min, tell me what the y-intercept is, the axis of symmetry, and the vertex. That's all I really need to know from you, along with a picture of what you think the graph should look like. So if you have questions, please let me know, and I will post